everyone, it's Julianne here and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here today and that you decided to join me. I have been dying to use the Slumbering Sloths stamp and die set from My Favorite Things, and I finally had a chance to pull that stamp set out in order to create this Slimline card. I actually ended up creating two cards today, and I'll show you the other one later on in this video. Now for both of my cards, I did use the Slumbering Sloths stamp and die set from My Favorite Things, as well as the Stitched Rolling Clouds Edges Die-namics set. Now I'm going to start out by stamping two of the adorable sloths, as well as the stars that are included in this stamp set. I'm going to be stamping all of the images using Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'll be stamping them onto a sheet of expressive blending cardstock, so that way I can do some Copic coloring. Now I am going to stamp the images a couple of times just to get a nice solid black outline, since these are new stamps. And then I'm going to start working on my coloring. Next, I'm going to start working on creating my background. Now, I started out by die cutting a piece of bristle smooth cardstock off camera, and I used the Trinity Stamps Slimline card series, their stitched card panels and windows die set. I'm going to be doing some ink blending on that panel using my Distress inks, and I'm going to start out with my base color of Blueprint Sketch. I'm going to be ink blending that entire Slimline panel. Once I have that all ink blended, I'm then going to be coming in order to darken that area so that it looks like a night sky. And I'm going to come in with Chipped Sapphire. I'm going to be adding that color of ink to each one of the edges. And I'm going to just be fading that color in towards the center of my panel. But I'm going to make sure that I keep that center highlight of that Blueprint Sketch. Next, I'm going to come in with Black Soot. And again, I'm just going to be adding that color around each one of my edges. But this time, I'm not going to be bringing in that color in as far as I did the Chipped Sapphire. But once I have all three of my colors down, I'll then be going over the entire panel again, first with that Chipped Sapphire, and then finally I'll go over everything one more time with Blueprint Sketch in order to get a really nice seamless blend. Now off camera, I did end up spritzing my background using some water. And I also took some Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearls, and I just splattered some of that throughout my background to look like stars as well. Now while my background panel was drying off to the side, off camera I used the Stitch Rolling Clouds Edges die set for my favorite things, and I ran those dies through my die cutting machine using some white cardstock. And I did that multiple times so that I could have multiple layers of clouds on the bottom as well as on the top of my card panel. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to be placing one of those bottom cloud die cut pieces inside of my MISTI, and I'm going to be stamping out the sentiment that reads, "I'm dreaming of us spending time together." I thought this sentiment was super cute, and it definitely matched my scene since I'm going to be placing the sloths as though they're just dreaming away in the clouds. So once I get that sentiment all stamped out, I'm now going to start working on adhering down each one of those cloud downs to my background. Now I'm going to start off with the first layer of clouds, and I'm going to be adding some liquid adhesive behind them, and then I'm going to be adhering them directly down to my background panel. Now for the second layer of clouds, and this is the layer that has that sentiment that I just stamped on it, I'm going to be adhering that on top of the other layer, but this time I'm going to be adhering it down using foam adhesive, and that's going to give me some really nice dimension between those two layers. So I'm going to be doing that not only with the clouds at the bottom of my panel, but also with the clouds on the top. I really like the way that this gives the layers as well as the depth to both of those. So once again, I'll adhere that first layer of clouds directly down to my background panel using that liquid adhesive. And then I'll be adding the foam adhesive to the second layer, and then I'll just remove those backer pieces before adhering down that layer directly over the clouds that are already adhered. Now once I have those clouds adhered, I'm now going to start working on adhering down my sloths. Now I use the coordinating dies for those, and I ran those dies through my die cutting machine with some white cardstock, and I did that 2 times, and I've adhered those die cuts together, and that's going to add some dimension behind my images without having to use foam adhesive. So now I'm going to be adhering the sloths that I colored earlier directly over those die cut pieces using some liquid adhesive. Once I have each one of those adhered down, I can then work on adhering them down to my background panel. Now I'm going to start off by adhering the first one that's on the left-hand side of my card, and I'm just going to be adhering him so he's slightly hanging off the edge of my panel. Once I have him adhered, I'll then work on adhering the second sloth that's up at the top of my card, and again, I'm just going to be adhering him where he's just slightly hanging off the edge of my panel. Now instead of adding sequins on my card today, I'm going to be adhering the star images that are also from the Slumbering Sloths stamp set, and I'm going to be adhering those down throughout that ink blended area. Once I have each one of those adhered, I'm going to be finishing off my card for today by just adding some additional adhesive to the back of my background panel, and I'll be adhering that down to my Slimline card base that I have trimmed and scored out of some black cardstock. Once I have my panel all adhered, that's going to complete my card for today, using that adorable stamp set, the Slumbering Sloths stamp and die set from My Favorite Things. I just love how this card came out. I think it is so super cute. Here I'm going to show you that additional card that I created that I mentioned earlier. Now I used the exact same supplies in order to create this card. I just made it A2 size. So if you're not a fan of Slimline, you can also create the same scene that we did, just in A2 size, or maybe even in a mini Slimline as well. Now I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to my channel for even more card making ideas. Now, for a list of supplies that I've used on the cards, you can visit the description box down below. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time, and happy crafting!